Hi, you're in class with Dr. T.
Today, I want to talk about the idea of abolitionists, from the fight against slavery to the battle against structural racism, the evolution of a movement for justice. The evolution of abolitionist thought from the 19th to the 20th century marks a significant expansion in freedom, equality, and justice. While 19th century abolitionists like Frederick Douglass focused on ending slavery, later thinkers like Angela Davis have broadened the scope to include the abolition of the prison industrial complex, addressing the systematic roots of oppression. This shift reflects a deeper understanding of abolition as a continuous struggle against all forms of injustice, rooted in Enlightenment ideas and radical democracy. I want to explore this evolution through the lives and work of 10 key figures, illustrating how the quest of freedom has transformed over time. For example, Frederick Douglass was born into slavery, escaped to become a leading abolitionist renowned for his powerful speeches and writings. His autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, exposed the brutal realities of slavery and advanced moral arguments for abolition. Douglass believed that the U.S. Constitution, when interpreted correctly, supported freedom and equality for all, challenging pro-slavery interpretations. He championed education, political activism, and suffrage for all Americans, irrespective of gender, laying foundational principles for future civil rights movements, and continuing the struggle for Black liberation and feminism. Harriet Tubman believed sincerely in freedom as a fundamental human right. Her philosophy on abolition was rooted in action, bravery, and self-sacrifice. Tubman, known as the Moses of her people, risked her life countless times, guiding enslaved individuals to freedom via the Underground Railroad. Her advocacy extended beyond abolition. She champions women's suffrage and the rights of the marginalized. Tubman believed true freedom required not only the end of slavery, but the active pursuit of justice and equality for all oppressed people, making for a lifelong advocate for human rights. Ida B. Wells was a pioneering journalist, educator, and civil rights activist whose work extended the legacy of abolitionists into the fight against racial violence and systematic injustice. Born into slavery during the Civil War, Wells used her platform to expose the horrors of lynching through her groundbreaking investigative journalism, particularly in the works like Southern Horrors and The Red Record. She argued that lynching was a tool of racial oppression used to maintain white supremacy post-slavery. Wells' philosophy was rooted in abolitionist ideals, emphasizing the need for truth, justice, and equality, while advocating for federal anti-lynching laws to protect Black lives and dismantle racist systems. W.E.B. Du Bois was a pioneering intellectual, sociologist, and civil rights activist who extended the abolitionist tradition by advocating not only for the legal end of slavery, but for the full emancipation of African Americans from systematic oppression. His concept of double consciousness illuminated the psychological toll of racism, reflecting the ongoing struggle for identity and equality in a white-dominated society. Du Bois' advocacy for higher education and the talented 10th built upon abolitionist ideals by focusing on Black empowerment through intellectual and cultural uplift. His critiques of capitalism, exploitation of Black labor also connected abolitionism with broader struggles for economic justice. Marcus Garvey was a proponent of Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism, advocating for the economic and political empowerment of African Americans through the establishment of an independent Black nation. Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, promoted Black pride, self-reliance, and unity across the African diaspora. His ideas influenced later movements, including the civil rights and Black Power movements, by emphasizing the importance of economic independence and collective action. Ella Baker was a tireless civil rights organizer who believed in grassroots activism and collective leadership. Deeply connected her to the abolitionist tradition, she championed that social change must come from the bottom up, advocating for ordinary people movement leadership. Baker's work with organizations like the NAACP, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee embodied abolitionist values by fighting for racial equality, dismantling oppressive systems, and empowering marginalized communities to take control of their liberation, echoing the legacy of abolitionist activism. Malcolm X was a leader in the Nation of Islam who later became an independent advocate for Black empowerment and human rights. He challenged the civil rights movement's focus on integration, instead advocating for self-defense, autonomy, and Black pride. After his pilgrimage to Mecca, Malcolm X adopted a more inclusive approach to human rights, while remaining a fierce critic of systematic racism. His ideas of Black nationalism and global solidarity deeply influenced the Black Power movement and laid the groundwork for later activists like Angela Davis. Malcolm X's philosophy of Black self-determination, anti-colonialism, and economic justice expanded the abolitionist tradition by challenging not only racial oppression, but also systematic poverty, police brutality, and global imperialism. His call for international solidarity further aligned his activism with abolitionist principles, advocating for the complete dismantling of oppressive structures to achieve true liberation for Black people worldwide. Fannie Lou Hamer was a civil rights activist born to sharecroppers in Mississippi, experiencing firsthand the harsh realities of racial and economic oppression. Her involvement in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and leadership in the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party made her a fierce advocate for African American voting rights, particularly in the South, where disenfranchisement was rampant. Hamer's activism was deeply rooted in the abolitionist tradition, fighting to dismantle not just racial segregation, but the broader systems of economic exploitation and political exclusion. Her famous statement, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired," embodied the frustrations of oppressed Black Americans and called for systematic change. She empowered marginalized communities through grassroots organizing, continuing the abolitionist legacy for advocating for full civic participation in human rights. Martin Luther King was a Baptist minister and civil rights leader who became the face of the nonviolent struggle for racial equality in the United States. King's leadership in pivotal moments such as the Montgomery bus boycott and the March on Washington reflected his commitment to dismantling systematic racism. His philosophy of nonviolence, rooted in Christian theology and the teaching of Mahatma Gandhi, fit into the abolitionist tradition by advocating for not only the end of segregation, but the full liberation of Black Americans from racial and economic oppression. King's activism against poverty, war, and inequality expanded the abolitionist vision to include a comprehensive call for human rights and justice across all sectors of society, continuing the legacy of freedom fighters before him. Finally, Angela Davis integrates the abolition critique of slavery into larger social economic concerns by linking the legacy of slavery to contemporary systems of racial and economic exploitation, mainly through the prison industrial complex. In Our Prisons Are Obsolete, Davis argues that prisons are an extension of the structures that once upheld slavery, reinforcing racial hierarchies and economic disparities. By connecting the abolition of slavery to the need for prison abolition, Davis broadens the scope of abolitionist thought, emphasizing the importance of addressing systematic oppression in all its forms, whether through race, gender, or class, while advocating for alternatives that foster restorative justice, economic equality, and true freedom for marginalized communities. The evolution of abolitionist thought from the 19th to the 20th century reflects a deepening understanding of the systematic nature of oppression. Early abolitionists like Douglass and Tubman focused on the immediate goal of ending slavery, while figures like Wells and Du Bois expanded the struggle to include racial violence and economic exploitation. By the mid-20th century, activists like Malcolm X and Ella Baker were challenging the structures of white supremacy and advocating for Black self-determination. Angela Davis represents the culmination of these evolving ideas, integrating the struggles against racism, sexism, and economic exploitation into a comprehensive framework for social justice. Her work on prison abolition reflects a radical rethinking of justice and seeks to dismantle the very system that perpetuates inequality. From Frederick Douglass to Angela Davis, the struggle for abolition and freedom has transformed over time, expanding to address the systematic roots of oppression in all its forms. Each generation of abolitionists and civil rights activists has built upon the work of their predecessors, deepening the analysis of racial, economic, and gender inequalities. Angela Davis' contribution to abolitionist thought represents a radical reimagining of justice. Thank you. Please subscribe, please like, please share content, and hit the bell.